Montana Territory, 1883. The wind snapped through the high plains like it was trying to tear the sky apart, and Rosalie Granger held tighter to her son's hand as they stood in front of the farmhouse door that had just slammed shut in her face. "Go," her sister's husband had said, voice like iron. "You were her mistake, not mine. Take your bastard and get off my land." She had not begged. She would not. But she had stood there for a moment too long, hoping for even a flicker of mercy. There had been none. So she turned from the house, her hands raw from the cold, her 6-year-old boy's fingers gripping hers like he knew they had nowhere to go. "Where are we going, Mama?" Kellan asked, his voice too small for the wide world ahead. "Away," she said, pushing tears back down her throat. "Somewhere better." She had arrived in Montana only a week ago, stepping off the train in Helena with a marriage license crumpled in her pocket and hope stitched tight in her chest. But the man she had come to marry, a widower she'd corresponded with through a mail-order agency, had died 3 days before her arrival. His brother, who now owned the house and the land, had made it clear she and her son were not welcome. So now she walked, past the edge of town, past the last fence line, past the point where pride gave way to survival. They slept beneath a broken wagon that night, huddled against the wind, wrapped in her one wool shawl. Kellan curled up against her, cold and quiet. The next morning brought no change in their fortune. Rosalie tightened the belt on her coat and led her boy back onto the road, hoping for anything: work, shelter, a barn floor if it came to that. By late afternoon, her legs ached and Kellan's cheeks were red from the wind. They had seen no houses for miles, just open grazing land and the far-off hum of cattle. Then came the thunder of hooves. Rosalie turned fast, pulling Kellan behind her. A rider was approaching, fast and sure, cutting across the land like he belonged to it. He slowed as he reached them, reining in his horse with the ease of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. Dust clung to the hem of his long coat, and his wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face until he tilted it up. "You folks lost." His voice was deep, calm, but his eyes clear and steady landed on Kellan first, then on her, and something in his face changed. We were walking," Rosalie said, barely able to speak from the cold and the dryness in her throat. "We were looking for work." The man dismounted, his boots crunching against the dry grass. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet steadiness about him that made her want to cry. "This is cattle country," he said gently, stepping closer. "Not much out here but grass and fence posts. You got anywhere to go?" "No," she said. He looked down at Kellan, who was shivering now, lips blue. "I got a ranch about 5 miles east. Come with me. You both look half frozen." Rosalie hesitated. "Why would you help us?" He met her eyes. "Because you need it." She looked at her boy. He was not going to make it another night in the cold. So she nodded. The man lifted Kellan with a practiced arm and handed him up onto his saddle. Then he turned to Rosalie, offering his hand. "Name's Silas Hart," he said. "Rosalie Granger." Silas held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he helped her up onto the horse behind her son. They rode in silence, the wind biting less now that they were moving. Silas walked beside them, leading the horse, not saying much. He did not ask questions, did not look at her with pity. Just kept them moving. The ranch was tucked between 2 hills, a long house with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn, and a corral full of cattle. It was clean, well kept, safe. He helped her down first, then Kellan. A ranch hand came out from the barn, nodding to Silas before leading the horse away. Silas opened the front door and stepped aside. "Come in. Fire's going." She walked in slowly. The warmth hit her like a wave. Kellan made a small sound of relief and ran toward the hearth. "You can stay here tonight," Silas said. "Longer if you need it. I got spare rooms. No one else lives here but me." Rosalie turned to him. "Why are you being kind to us?" He looked at her, serious now. "Because I know what it is to be left with nothing." She did not ask what he meant. She just nodded. Later, after warm stew and a bath for Kellan, Rosalie stood in the hallway outside the guest room. Silas had brought in extra blankets. His movements were quiet, careful. "Thank you," she said. "You do not need to thank me," he replied, straightening the quilt. "You are doing what you have to. That takes grit." She watched him. There was something about him that settled her. Not just kindness but steadiness. Like he had his feet planted deep in the earth and nothing could shake him. "Do you live alone?" she asked. "Used to have a brother. He passed. This was his land before mine. I built most of it up after he got sick." She nodded. "My sister passed. Her husband cast us out." He looked at her then, sharp and quiet. "That boy yours?" "Yes." "Then he is worth everything." Rosalie blinked fast. No one had said that to her in a long time. She went to bed that night in a warm bed, Kellan curled up beside her, and for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. The next morning, she stepped into the kitchen to find Silas already cooking. He handed her a tin cup of coffee and nodded toward a chair. "I figured you might want to stay a few days. Let the boy rest up." She took the coffee, her hand brushing his. "You are a good man, Silas." His eyes met hers. "I try to be." And something shifted between them, then something small but real. A warmth. A spark. Rosalie looked away first, her cheeks warm. "I will earn our keep. I can sew, clean, help with meals." "You do not owe me anything," he said. "But I will not turn down help." She smiled. "Then I will start with sweeping." He smiled back, slow and real. "Deal." That afternoon, she watched from the porch as Silas taught Kellan how to throw feed to the chickens. The boy laughed. The first real laugh she had heard from him in days. Silas ruffled his hair, patient and kind. Rosalie pressed a hand to her chest, something aching and full rising inside her. She had come to Montana chasing a promise that had died before she could reach it. But maybe, just maybe, something better had found her instead. The air warmed slightly in the days that followed, though the wind still pulled hard across the hills. Rosalie hung linens behind the house, her fingers stiff from the cold, but the ache in her shoulders felt different than it had when she'd wandered those roads. Now it came from purpose, not desperation. Inside, the house had a rhythm. Not hurried, but steady. Silas left early each morning to ride his fence lines or check on calving cows. He returned before dusk, often quiet, always watchful. Rosalie found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch. One morning, after breakfast, she caught him oiling his saddle outside the barn. She stepped down from the porch, brushing her hands on her apron. "I noticed you've got a few hens with frostbitten combs," she said. "I can mix some salve for them, if you've any lard and pine resin." He looked up from his work, surprised. "You know how to treat livestock?" "My father ran a small holding back in Missouri. I picked up a thing or two." She paused. "You've got a few fence boards pulling away from the posts near the east pasture. I noticed them when I took Kellan walking yesterday." Silas set down his rag, the ghost of a smile pulling at his mouth. "You see everything, don't you?" "I try," she said. "I can't sit idle. I never could." He nodded, then stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Come ride with me tomorrow. We'll bring tools, fix what's come loose." Rosalie hesitated, then gave a short nod. "I'd like that." Later that evening, she found Kellan sitting cross-legged on the parlor rug, carving a small block of wood with a blunt knife Silas had given him. He looked up when she entered. "Mr. Hart said I could help him mend a gate tomorrow," he said. "He showed me how to check the hinges." She knelt beside him, brushing shavings into a pile. "Did you thank him?" "I did. He said I could keep this knife, long as I'm careful." She touched his curls. "Then be careful." "He doesn't talk much," Kellan added, "but he listens when I do." Rosalie looked toward the hearth where Silas's coat hung drying from the snow. "Yes," she murmured. "He does." The next morning, she found a second saddle laid out beside the barn. Silas didn't say anything when she approached, just handed her the reins of a Combay mare. "She's steady," he said. "Name's Hazel. Been with me 6 winters." Rosalie mounted without fumbling. Her skirts were tucked up under her coat, and she sat with the ease of someone who hadn't forgotten their upbringing. Silas watched her for a breath before turning his gelding toward the eastern ridge. They rode without hurry. Snow clung to the shaded side of the hill, but the sun had softened the ground along the trail. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full of unsaid things. When they reached the broken fence, she dismounted first and crossed to inspect it. "You've got burrowers," she said. "Probably badgers. They dig under and loosen the frost heave." He handed her a hammer without comment. They worked side by side for over an hour. Wood creaked under the nails and the wind tugged at her hair. She tucked it behind her ear and kept hammering. At one point, he straightened and leaned on the post. "Your son's got good hands. He's careful. He's had to be." She didn't look up. "His father died before he was born. I had to learn how to raise him without leaning on anyone." Silas said nothing for a while. Then, "That's a heavy thing to carry alone." "I managed. I don't doubt that." When they finished the fence, she turned toward the distant ranch house. The chimney smoke curled steady into the sky. "He doesn't know what it means, not having a place." "Not really. I want to keep it that way." Silas nodded. "He's welcome here. Both of you are." She met his eyes. "You barely know us." "I know enough." That evening, Rosalie took down a worn recipe from memory and baked cornbread in the cast-iron stove. She found dried beans in the cellar and simmered them with salt pork and onion. Silas said nothing when he returned, just sat at the table and ate slowly, once nodding in appreciation. After Kellan was asleep, she stepped onto the porch to shake out the dishcloths. Silas stood at the edge of the yard, staring out into the dark fields. The moon caught the line of his jaw. "You don't sleep much," she said quietly. He didn't turn. "Not always." "Is it your brother?" He was silent a long moment. "Then he was younger. Got into something with a stallion that turned mean. I wasn't there. Should have been." Rosalie stepped beside him. "You can't carry that forever. Can't seem to put it down. Maybe you're not supposed to do it alone." He looked at her then. The night was cold, but his gaze held something warm, cautious, but open. "You planning to stay?" She didn't answer right away. "Then if you'll have us." "I already do." She nodded once, her arms crossed against the chill, but her heart steady in her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the bottom to fall out. Silas looked out over the land again, then back at her. "We'll build something here if you want. Doesn't have to be rushed." "I don't mind slow," she said. He smiled, then quiet, like everything he did, and she felt it settle in her bones. Inside, Kellan stirred in his sleep. Rosalie turned to go back in, and Silas followed, the door closing behind them with a sound that felt like home. Rosalie pressed her thumb into the dough until it gave, soft and ready. The sun was still low, spilling a narrow beam across the kitchen table and catching in the steam curling from the pot of chicory on the stove. She worked quietly, her thoughts steady for once. There was no dread sitting behind her ribs this morning, only the hum of a day waiting to be made useful. From the loft above, she heard Kellan's soft footfall. He was careful coming down the ladder now. Silas had shown him how to test each rung before shifting his weight. She didn't have to warn him anymore. "You can feed Hazel this morning," she said without looking up. "She's likely waiting on you." Kellan stopped beside her and nodded solemnly. "Mr. Hart said I can brush her too if I mind her sides." She handed him a biscuit wrapped in cloth. "Then you'd best not keep her waiting." He tugged on his coat and slipped outside, the door swinging gently behind him. Rosalie watched his small figure cross the yard, the wind pushing at his coat hem. The boy had taken to this place like he'd been born to it. She washed her hands and stepped out herself, apron strings fluttering. The barn door was open. Inside, Silas stood beside the foaling stall, his sleeves rolled and hay dust on his forearms. A bay mare paced slow circles, heavy with the weight of nearing birth. "She's close," he said without turning. "I'll stay through the night when it comes." "Do you need another pair of hands?" she asked. He glanced at her, something unspoken passing between them. "I wouldn't turn it down." An hour later, while Silas rode out to check the creek crossings west of the property, Rosalie busied herself mending the tear in Kellan's coat. She sat by the window where the light was best, the needle pulling clean through the fabric. She didn't miss the silence of town. Out here, the quiet carried life, cattle lowing, the soft creak of wood, the wind pressing through fence rails. By afternoon, she stepped back outside to find Silas leading a wagon up from the lower trail, its bed stacked with feed sacks and a coil of new rope. She moved to help before he asked, lifting one end of the canvas to steady the load. "They came in from Fort Benton," he said. "I put in the order last week." "I've never seen rope that fine," she said, running her hand along the coil. "It's twisted tighter than I've ever managed." "Made by Amidst family," he said. "Trade's good with them this season." She looked at him then. "You deal fair with everyone, don't you?" "I try," he said, lifting a sack onto his shoulder. "It's the only way I sleep at night." That evening, she found a small bundle of herbs drying by the stove, the leaves tied neatly with string. "I didn't bring those in," she said. Silas was wiping down his boots. "I asked a neighbor to ride them over. Thought you might want them for the salve you mentioned." She touched the stem, surprised. "That was days ago." He looked up. "I remember things." She nodded slowly and folded the bundle into her apron pocket. Later, when the sky deepened and the lamps were lit, Rosalie sat with her sewing while Silas read beside the hearth. He held the book low, his thumb marking the line. Kellan was asleep already, curled under the quilt Rosalie had patched that morning. "You read much?" he asked quietly. "When I can," she said. "Mostly scripture and farm papers. I used to copy out verses for my father's sermons." "Your father was a preacher?" "Not one with a pulpit. He ministered from the fields. Said work was the first kind of worship." Silas nodded slowly. "Sounds like a man who understood the world." Rosalie set her sewing aside. "He died before Kellan was born. Fever took him in late summer. My sister and I buried him under a rowan tree." Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You talk about him like someone you still walk beside." "I do," she said. "In the things I won't allow and in the ones I will." The fire popped, a long crackle like a whisper. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. "Not just for winter." She looked at him across the warm hush of the room. "I've thought about it every day since you gave us a place at your table." His voice was quiet. "You and Kellan, you belong here more than I ever did." "That's not true," she said gently. He met her gaze. "I built this place so no one could take anything from me again. But it's always felt like waiting. Until you." She stood slowly, crossing to him without rush. Her hand found his shoulder, warm beneath the flannel. He didn't move, didn't look away. "You don't have to wait anymore," she said. His hand came up to cover hers, strong and certain. Outside, the wind had settled. The house stood quiet and sure, as if it had been waiting all along, not just for shelter to be given but for a home to be shared. The mare foaled just after midnight. Rosalie had stayed in the stall with Silas, kneeling in the straw while the mare labored through the dark hours. Neither of them spoke much, only what was needed. When the filly came small and slick and trembling, Silas steadied her legs and cleared her nose while Rosalie pressed warm cloths to the mare's side. The lantern light made his face look older, but there was a softness in it as he watched the newborn wobble to stand. By the time they returned to the house, the sky had begun to pale. They didn't wake Kellan. Rosalie laid her shawl over the back of a chair and poured water for them both. Silas drank slow, then rubbed his thumb along the rim of the tin cup. "She's strong," he said. "Didn't expect her to stand so fast." "She wanted to live," Rosalie replied, folding her arms. "Some do." He looked at her, not with the weight of pity but recognition. "You ought to name her," he said. "That's your place." "Not this time." She studied him a long moment. "Then I'll call her Mercy." He nodded once, as though it fit something he hadn't said aloud. That day passed in a hush. Kellan helped carry water to the barn and swept the porch with a broom too tall for him. Rosalie scrubbed the floors and aired out the rooms, her movements brisk. She could feel something settling in her, not comfort, she'd never trusted that word, but a kind of rootedness. By the following week, the snow had thinned to patches. Silas began clearing brush along the southern fence line, and Rosalie joined him after the midday meal. She carried a pail with bread and hard cheese, and when she found him dragging a felled limb toward the pile, she set it down and rolled up her sleeves. You don't need to do that, he said. I know, she answered, grasping the other end. But I want to. They worked until the shadows grew long. At one point, he passed her a canteen and sat nearby, watching as she brushed dirt from her skirt. You ever think about the kind of life you'd have had if things had gone the way they were meant to? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Then I used to. Before I came west, I thought about it every night. And now, I've stopped wondering. It never led me anywhere good. His gaze lingered on her hands, callous now in places that had once been soft. I used to think a man had to earn peace before he deserved it, he said. And I never figured I had. You think that now? I'm trying to. She leaned back against the fence rail. Peace doesn't wait on permission. It just asks you to stay when it shows up. He looked at her then, and whatever lived behind his quiet eyes unlatched itself, just a little. Not ceremony. Just truth. I want to build something lasting, he said. Not just with my hands. With my life. But I don't know what that looks like for a man like me. You're already building it, she replied. That night, she found a folded length of muslin left on the table with a note in Silas's hand. The writing was firm, the letters shaped by someone who learned from ledger books and not from leisure. It simply said, for the boy's new shirt, he's outgrown the shoulders again. She ran her thumb over the edge of the fabric, then looked over to where Kellan slept, one foot sticking out from under the blanket. The next morning, she stitched the shirt while the sun climbed. When Kellan tried it on, he grinned and tugged at the sleeves. Looks like it fits, Silas said from the doorway, his hat in one hand. Rosalie straightened. Thank you for the cloth. I've come to like seeing him grow. She met his eyes. And me. He stepped into the room slow. I've come to like seeing you stay. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held everything still left unsaid, everything they were learning how to carry. She reached for his hand, not tentative, but sure. I want to stay, Silas. I want to build it with you. He drew her close, his hand warm against her back. Then we will. Outside, the wind was soft for once, and the sky stretched clean above the hills. The ranch stood solid behind them, and in the barn, the foal let out a high, bright sound, the kind that only comes from new things beginning. The last frost of spring lifted in the night, and by morning, the earth had softened enough for planting. Rosalie stood in the garden plot behind the house, her skirts tucked beneath her knees, hands buried to the wrist in dark soil. The sun warmed the back of her neck, and the scent rising from the ground reminded her of Missouri in May. Only here, the air was thinner, the quiet deeper, and the promise stronger. Silas knelt beside her, sleeves rolled, a line of seed potatoes in a burlap sack between them. He handed her one, their fingers brushing. You ever plant by moon signs? She asked, pressing her thumb against a sprouting eye. My mother did. Claimed everything grew better if you waited for a waxing crescent. Well, she was right. This moon's nearly full. We'll get strong vines. He watched her dig the next furrow, the tool steady in her hand. You've got a way with the land. I think it just remembers being shaped by someone who needed it. He didn't reply, just reached for another potato while the breeze moved through the cottonwoods on the ridge. By midday, the last row was covered. Silas leaned on the shovel, sweat darkening his collar. Rosalie rinsed her hands in the basin and turned toward the barn. Kellan's laughter echoed from inside, clear and unguarded. He's been trailing after Amos all morning, Silas said. Boy's full of questions. That old man pretends to hate it, but I saw him whittling a toy rope halter for him last night. Rosalie smiled. He's never had anyone besides me to ask. He's got more now. They crossed to the porch, the board's warm underfoot. Rosalie sat, brushing dirt from under her nails. Silas settled beside her, pulling a sliver from his palm with the tip of a nail. I sent word to the circuit judge last week, he said, voice even. He comes through here every June. She turned to him. For what? To marry us. If you'll have it. Rosalie's hands stilled in her lap. She looked at him fully. You already gave us a home. You didn't need to do more. I didn't do it out of duty, he said. I want this to be yours, not just mine. I want to wake up beside you. I want the boy to know he belongs. She looked down at her lap, then back at him. "I've been someone's burden before. I swore I'd never be again." "You're not," he said simply. "You're the reason this house feels right." Her throat tightened. She reached for his hand, calloused and warm. "Yes, Silas. I'll marry you." He nodded, and for a long moment, they just sat there, hands folded together, the sky wide above them. 3 weeks later, on a still morning with the grass knee-high and the hills gold at the edges, they stood beneath the cottonwood near the barn while Judge Ellison read the vows from a small book. Kellan stood between them, holding a length of blue ribbon Rosalie had stitched into the hem of her skirt. He looked up once during the ceremony, and Silas rested a steady hand on his shoulder. When they were declared man and wife, Silas didn't kiss her quickly. He waited until her eyes met his, then leaned in slow like he had all the time in the world. That evening they ate supper outside, fresh trout from the stream Amos had brought up, cornbread Rosalie had baked that morning, and beans simmered with wild garlic. Kellan fell asleep on a quilt in the grass beside the porch, his hands still wrapped around the toy halter. Silas lifted him gently and carried him inside. Later, Rosalie stood in the doorway watching the land fade into dusk. Silas came to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist. "You ever think you'd see all this?" he asked. "I didn't let myself," she said. "But I hoped." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "We'll plant more next season. Maybe a row of corn along the south fence. And a patch of sweet herbs by the kitchen window. We'll teach him to tend it," Silas said. "Let him know what it means to grow something worth keeping." She leaned back into him. "We already are." The days lengthened after that. June passed into July with rain when it was needed and sun when it wasn't. The foal, Mercy, grew tall and fast-legged, and Kellan led her on a rope through the pasture every morning, careful and proud. Rosalie kept the garden, made preserves, mended shirts, and once a week rode into town beside Silas to trade eggs and butter. They didn't talk much on those rides, but when they did, it was about quiet things: the first frost, the way the creek curved, the sound of meadowlarks at dawn. At night, after the lamps were turned down, Rosalie would lie beside him and trace the faint scar above his collarbone, the one he never spoke of. He didn't flinch anymore. He only held her closer. One evening, as the heat of summer finally broke and the air turned sweet with clover, Rosalie stood in the barn doorway watching Kellan brush Mercy down with steady strokes. "He's strong," Silas said beside her. "He's steady," she replied. "Like you." Silas touched her cheek. "You made him brave." She took his hand. "We made each other whole." The light faded slow across the ridge, and the land held its breath, quiet and full. They didn't need to speak after that. Everything worth saying had already been planted, deep and sure, and now it was blooming soft and certain, beneath the same sky that had once stretched empty and unforgiving. Now it was theirs, forever.